So hello Joan, welcome to my YouTube channel. How are you?
I'm doing well, Gigi. How about you?
I'm doing great. It's a sunny day. I hope that clouds are not coming, but I'm doing good. I'm doing good. So thanks for being here. Thanks for your time. So just to start the video, can you introduce yourself and tell us about your childhood? Where did you grow up? Where do you come from?
Okay, sure. So just really briefly, so my name is Joan. I come from Ghana. I'm originally from Ghana. I was born in the U.S. I was raised in Nigeria and Syria. So I've had a childhood all over the place, but I rep Ghana.
Okay, so you were raised, I'm not sure I hear it correctly, but you were born and raised between Nigeria and Syria?
I was born in the U.S. in California.
Okay.
And then I was raised in Nigeria. It was till I was 12, my family was living in Nigeria. And then when I was 12, my family moved to Aleppo, to Syria, and I lived there. I was there for 5 years until I finished high school. And the rest of my family was there until 2011, just when things were starting to, right before things kind of, got a little hectic there. So my parents moved back to Ghana with my youngest sibling.
Cool. And how was life in Syria like?
It was definitely different than life in Nigeria. It was interesting, I think, to get there. When you're 12, you go from literally the largest nation with the largest population of Black people, and there weren't that many in Aleppo. So I think initially it was very interesting to kind of get used to being one of the only people that looked like me, or to see the way that people react to that when they either haven't seen a Black person before, or have just certain prejudices to you. But I think outside of that was probably the biggest challenge. But beyond that, still went to international school, met quite a few classmates that I'm still in touch with. I think the nice things with the Middle East particularly is there's such a rich culture there. And I think that I was privileged to be able to see that at a young age before you kind of see how things have, developed recently. But yeah, I had a good time ultimately.
Cool, that's awesome. And yeah, I've never heard about a Black female growing up in Syria, so that's pretty cool. So can you tell us about your undergraduate diplomas or experience, and explain us why did you decide to take an MBA?
Sure, so I'll break it down and start with my undergraduate experience, and then I'll talk about why I wanted to go to business school. So I went to undergrad at the University of Pennsylvania. I graduated in 2012, and while I was there, I majored in international relations and economics, and I minored in French and African studies. And in my mind, I had career goals and just a passion for global development and social impact. I think perhaps maybe because of having hopped around and the work that my parents were doing. But so that's really what motivated me. But yeah, it was a good experience. I was in the US, and so I'd left Syria and came directly to the US, and it was the first time I was going to be actually living here, because when I was born here, I was just born here. And yeah, it was a good experience. It's beyond the academic, outside, extracurriculars. I was doing performing arts. I was tutoring in the community. I got the opportunity to study abroad in France, did an internship in Ghana. It was just a generally good experience. And so in terms of the second part, why I decided to get an MBA. So immediately after graduating from undergrad, I kind of focused primarily in the social impact space, specifically in the education space. So I did Teach for America, and I taught 5th grade math and science for a while in Miami. And then I moved to Johannesburg in South Africa, and I was working at an educational nonprofit. And I think there were two things. Well, one was I always knew I was going to get some form of a master's degree. That's just the family I was raised in. If my dad had his way, I'll also be going for a PhD, but we're not going to do it. So I just knew I was going to get some form of a master's degree, and it was just a question of which one is it going to be? And so I was deciding between, a master's in education, MBA, law school, master's in public policy, international development, all those sorts of things. And I had been leaning one of the other ways, and it was when I moved to South Africa that I really began to realize that I had underestimated the role that I think the private sector should play in terms of the socioeconomic development on the African continent. So here I was working at this educational nonprofit, and my first role was in donor relations. And so I'm the person that's writing these communications to these large corporates that are either funding some of our students, or giving us money, or writing a grant to a high net worth individual, and just realizing the power of capital, even in the social impact in the nonprofit space. And I think as well, I was just meeting other young African professionals that were in other industries that I really didn't even know anything about, that were in the private sector. So, I'd heard of consulting with those things, but someone said to me PE, and I'm like, wait, what, physical education? Because that's the mindset I was in. I was a fifth grade teacher. And so I began to learn about these things like private equity, and realizing that I didn't really know that much about, even the entrepreneurship space and VC and what have you. And so I think what really pushed me to think about getting an MBA was, this is going to be a critical part of the way that our continent grows. And I want to have a basic understanding, at least, of how, the business world operates, and even dabble there a little bit and think about how I can have, even greater impact in, at least in my goals. And so that's kind of what rerouted me to get an MBA. And I think just even as I was doing research on different kinds of programs, one thing that stood out to me about the MBA degree is, as much as it is about technical education and things that you can learn, like counting and marketing, what have you, that there's also a large leadership and personal development component to it. And I think that that's something that I really appreciated, and that I've, now having graduated, have come to see was actually the case.
Okay. So speaking about your career, I checked your profile
Mm-hmm.
on LinkedIn, and I saw that you are really into education, and I am too. So I was just wondering what attracts you in education, and what are you passionate about? Because for me, for example, I'm really into, I will say, people empowerment. I believe that everyone can achieve its dream,
Exactly.
Everyone has a full potential to achieve its dream. So it's just about, knowledge, education, putting the work, and eventually you will get, what you were looking for, dreaming of. So what about you?
Yeah, so I think education is probably one of, if not the most powerful tool to really transform people's lives, to, open doors, right? It's not the only tool. But I just think when you look at it at a systemic level, that the education system is so powerful. And so, yes, it is a lot about helping youth realize their potential, right? Helping young people realize, or just anybody really realize their potential. And I think that people underestimate how much they can learn, and then beyond that, how much you can do with what you know. So that's, as much as in the formal education system as it is in the informal education system. But I think that's kind of really where my mindset focuses on, everything from youth development to youth employment, and how, the skills you need to equip young people with so that they're able to, be better market themselves in the labor market, to early childhood, or elementary education, and just literary skills, and how much that can change the trajectory of a child. I think that education, because of its power, is an area where we need to the extent possible, not only create equal access, for people to quality education systems. And I think that education equity is something that is important to me. I think that part of something I realized just period, but also just having gone through the Teach for America experience, and, seeing firsthand, realizing that that's an issue, as much as it is in parts of the developing world, as it is here in the United States, is something that really stood out to me. But yeah, I kind of spanned the gamut. But yeah, I think at the end of the day, it really boils down to helping people understand that there's so much that they can do, regardless of what they've been told or what the system says, or even if the system's sort of built against them, that education is such a powerful tool.
Yeah. So going back to the MBA experience,
yeah.
So you are currently a Wharton student, right?
I have just graduated from Wharton as of last month.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
So was Wharton your first choice when you decided to go for an MBA?
It was one of my top 3 choices. So I did a program called Management Leadership for Tomorrow, the MBA prep program. And through the course of that program, I think I researched about 10 different schools. I ended up applying to 6 of them. And really my only prayer, I remember like praying to God, I was like, Lord, I want to go to like a top 5 business school. That's the goal. That's the goal. So I kind of split my 6 and I applied to like 3 ones I think pretty much everybody applies to. So I applied to Wharton, Stanford, Harvard, and then I also applied to Kellogg, Yale, and MIT. All like really excellent schools, but it was definitely at the top of my choice. And I think after the interview period for the schools that I interviewed with, I interviewed for 3 schools. Wharton was definitely at the top of my list. Yeah, I think my interview experience there was just like, it was like, yes, this is where I need to be. And it's interesting because I've been to Penn before. I went to Penn undergrad, and so Wharton is the business school there. So I think there's definitely some of that familiarity, but at the same time, I've been wondering like, oh, do I want to do it again? Or, go back to the same place. And I think, yeah, the internship kind of really stood out to me from like a culture basis that this would be something that I would enjoy.
So can you share with us one of your best memories from your MBA experience?
Oh, so hard, so many.
Can imagine.
There's so many. Oh my goodness, wow. There's so many. I think that one of the highlights for me of the MBA experience has definitely been like the opportunity to travel with classmates. And so when you say that, I'm just like, which trip? But yeah, just speaking to my previous example about, learning about different experiences and different cultures, I was one of the participants on the Barbados trek earlier this year. I think that was actually my last trip before all this shutdown stuff happened. And so a group of classmates, first years and second years, went to Barbados. It was about 30 of us, and we spent about a half a week there. And like most treks, organized by your cultural groups, particularly your cultural affinity groups. It was organized by students, led by students, and the idea is to expose people to the culture, give them an understanding of some of the business, but also just an opportunity to bond and experience, a different country with classmates. And so it was just amazing. So here we are on an island, I'm not recruiting, so I'm sorted for next year, like just having a great time on the boat, on the beach, just learning about just everything. It was fantastic. It was really fantastic. So yeah, that was one of my highlights. I think on campus, there's just so many, and it's funny, I think that you have as many memories about time. I think you have even more memories about time spent outside the classroom, just like interacting and bonding with classmates in an informal, organic manner than you do sometimes of even time that you spent inside the classroom. But you always remember the time that you were the professor just called you and you were trying to not make eye contact. You just so classrooms are always they're always great learning experiences. But it's wonderful, and I recommend it for for if it's a fit for most people for your career. I definitely recommend the MBA experience.
Okay, so what would be your advice to an African female or male who really wants to get into an MBA but is still wondering if he or she can or if it's necessary? What would be your advice?
I love that question because I think there's so many questions involved in that. So there's you mentioned why an MBA, is it necessary? And then there's also a question of if you're going to do the MBA, what's the best way to think about it and go about the process of applying? So I think I'd start with the first part. I would advise people to think very clearly about that first part. So why an MBA and do I need one? And the reason I'd say that is because it's not it's cheap. It's not you just show up and you take classes for 4 weeks and then you're done, right? This is a 1 year or 2 year commitment that costs money. So it's really important to think about the return on investment and also just the impact it would have on your trajectory or in terms of what you're trying to achieve, right? So I think that's the place to start is where are you now and where are you trying to go? And could an MBA get you there? If you didn't get in, but do the mental exercise. These are some of the things that I did. Like if you don't get in, like how else are you going to get there, right? And so then begin to weigh what your different like paths are in terms of like getting towards your goal. So I think that's the first question, is to like really build the case for like, all right, why do I want to do this? Because it's possible that you don't need to, but it can also be something that's, you know, a catalyst to help you achieve your goals. Mm-hmm. And then I think, you know, once you figure it out, okay, great, I want an MBA. There's a question of like, all right, what kind of MBA do I want, and what do I want the MBA for? And that helps you think about how to research different schools. So a big start is to ask yourself like, all right, do I want a 1-year program? Do I want a 2-year program? Mm-hmm. At a point in time, I wanted to apply. I thought of applying to, I really like the idea of Europe in my mind. I was like, I could see myself in London. All right, in Seattle. And I think, you know, so I really like that idea. I ended up not applying to many of those schools because I had done the GRE when I was figuring out what kind of graduate school I wanted to do. And I didn't feel like, my scores were great. I was like, I didn't feel like taking the GMAT again. And a lot of the international schools or schools outside the US asked for the GMAT. But I was able to apply to my business school, so just the GRE. So you ask yourself whether it's a 1-year program, a 2-year program, do that research of like, you know, do you want a school that's big, small? Wharton has like approximately 850 students per year. There are schools that are way smaller, you know, in the city, out of the city, all that kind of stuff, and kind of figure out, you know, what is the strength of each school? What does the diversity look like? What's the culture of each school? That's all really, really key. And then I think the final piece in terms of going through the application, I really enjoyed the MBA application process. Like in theory, I think in practice, when you're like, oh my God, I have to write this essay. Oh my God, I have to do this. It takes some time, it takes some work, but I think I liked it because if you give yourself towards it and you kind of trust the process, it is a great like reflection exercise in terms of, again, thinking about what are your goals? What exactly are you looking for out of the experience? And then also understanding like, who are you and like, what's your story? What's your brand? Where did you come from? And being able to communicate that to somebody else. So yeah, I think that answering those questions is key to any application.
What keeps you motivated when everything seems to fall apart around you?
Not every class has been easy, or even just decisions and choices around like how I balance my time between different things. Mm-hmm. So I definitely had like I said, I got rejected from 3 different schools. There's been classes where I like looked at the grade and I said, wow, oh my God, oh my goodness. And then I think the last example would just be like in terms of like time management. I think this past year, early in the year, just between like some of the leadership things that I was doing as far as my extracurriculars and then balancing that with class, I think I stretched myself too thin and wasn't able to deliver in some aspects as much as I would. I wasn't executing at the level that I expected myself across the board. And so I consider like a personal failure sometimes. I think I would say that a few things, right? So whenever you come across a failure, you know, disappointment, mistake, a rejection, is to be honest about it, but then also like be kind to yourself. I think that it's really easy to go into a downward spiral and just like continue to, you know, make the failure worse or like grow it even bigger than it is. And so I think that's important. I think the second thing is to put it into context, right? So in the grand scheme of things, like in the grand scheme of things, like how bad is it really that, you know, like the grade wasn't what you wanted it to be, especially at like schools where, you know, it's important to like strive, but you have like non-grade disclosure, or is it, how bad is it that, you know, one school didn't accept you, you got into another one. So there's just really asking yourself what the context is. And then I think probably the biggest learning for me, particularly this past year, is like to ask for help. So be honest with other people. I think particularly for like highly high achieving like people, like, you know, young professionals particularly, or even sometimes I think some of our cultures, you know, at least in Ghana or like in Africa, are very much like hard work and get it done by yourself. So I think it's really important to recognize that like you don't have to or can't even do it all by yourself. So ask for help. And then, in terms of what keeps me motivated, I think that I'm the kind of person where like just because I didn't do it now doesn't mean I can't do it. And that if I were to do it again, like, I can learn from my mistakes and like fix it. And so I think there's a decision to be made sometimes when I don't do something well, whether I want to do it again, or if I feel like actually I've got, I still take something away from this experience, right? I like music, and I feel like there's a song by Alicia Keys that's called Lesson Learned, and it's like, and the hook goes like, yes, I was burned, but I called it a lesson learned. And so I think that even when you have experiences that aren't necessarily positive, there's something to be gained from them to take into the next thing. And that in itself is something that pushes me forward. When I was teaching at the African Leadership Academy, I wasn't teaching well, I was working at the African Leadership Academy in Johannesburg. One of the things that would say to the students a lot would be like, fail forward, fail forward, fail forward. And I think that's really what it boils down to. It's okay to make mistakes as long as you learn from them, and to put yourself in like uncomfortable situations. At Wharton, we have this phrase called like a stretch experience, like put yourself in places that will stretch you. And so when you stretch something, it's very possible that you might break it, like you might break it. So just being able to make sure that you're like able to, either become really flexible and like develop practices of resilience and like mental health and coping, or know that when you break something, it's not like the end of the world.
I really like your approach about how people cope with mistakes and failure. Okay, so now we are going to move to a game. So here we'll play a game called Curious. So basically I will give you a scenario or a quick question, and you have to answer it. Just be candid. So you've been honest for the whole interview. Just say it like that, okay? So the first one is someone you would like to switch places with for a day.
Career-wise, or just like a name of a person?
The name.
Oh, wow. Ooh, Yvonne Orji. Orji. So yes. So I feel
actress.
Immediately you said that, I was like, I want to try something like creative, like in the creative space. And I feel like that would be really interesting to, act something or like write jokes, and be that sort of personality. Is a completely different like world. So that's, and I just saw her like comedy special as well. So it's kind of on my mind.
Okay, cool. One person from history you could take to dinner, who would it be?
I think I would want to take Kwame Nkrumah. So like I said, I come from Ghana, and I would be very intrigued about like the way, particularly like almost like either to go back in time and have a conversation with him about like things that are happening, or like take somebody from history and put them in the present and see how they would react to the way like things have developed. I think that would intrigue me. But Kwame Nkrumah also went to Penn for some time. So I would love to pick his brain about certain things in history.
Cool. Best piece of advice you ever got?
Wow. So off the top of my head, two things came to mind. One's were just advice from my mother, and it's sort of like, just clean as you go, pick up your stuff, like take 5 minutes now to do things so that you don't have to take like an hour later. And it applies to like pretty much everything. So like whether you're washing dishes and cooking, or like putting your clothes away. So that's one thing that came to my top of my mind. And the second thing that came to my mind was when I was teaching, and I had like a coach, and he said CYA, and I was like, what's CYA? And it's cover your, excuse my language, cover your ass, right? Like, and so basically it means to execute, but also make sure that like your business is like handled. Like if they come and ask you like what went wrong, like my part is done. It definitely wasn't me. Like, so just make sure that your stuff is handled and you're on top of your part.
Wow. Okay. What's the most important thing you think people should know about you?
Ooh, it's like an interview question.
Oh, really?
It feels like an interview question. I don't know. I think it would depend on the person. But I think, so two things. I think the first thing is I want them to know that so I think most people eventually find out how passionate I am for my continent, right? So I think I want people to know that I'm there I want to build and invest and just have impact on the African continent, and that the way that manifests itself generally is the way that I hold myself accountable, and then also how I try to help and pour into young people from the continent. I think just young people who look like me, so women of colors, things like that. And then the second thing I think is important for people to know is how to pronounce my name. So I get called, particularly in the US, I get called Joan a lot. But yeah, I think it's Joanne. So let's get it right, yeah.
Yeah, is Joan okay?
Yeah. No, so I never have that issue with like people who like speak French, because they like look at the entire thing and say it out. But here I get called Joan a lot. Actually, so we have these name tags that we use in class, and I went to Penn undergrad, and so I knew that people like just tend to call me Joan. So I actually like emailed them before I started the MBA, like, how do I make sure that like people don't make this mistake on like my name tag? They're like, put Joanne and then put the pronunciation you want on the name tag. And so then I got a name tag that says Joan, or Joan, Joanne, so Joanne Larby. And so I'm looking at the same tag. Do people really think that my mom called me Joanne Larby? And so I went and I got like white out and I put like quotation marks around the Joanne part. And it worked a little bit, but not for everybody. But yeah, that's one of the important.
And the last question, what would you change about Africa?
Wow.
So many things.
Wow.
Just
so many
one
things.
thing.
Yeah, no, if I had to pick one thing, right? I think that the thing I would pick would probably be, and I don't know how you could change this across the board, but it would probably be political, like leadership. I think that would be somewhere there, and there a way to like just like be like snap, and then every single African leader was like, accountable to their people, really thinking about how we're using our resources on the continent and who we actually trade with and sell with, and that's sort of like it would definitely be leadership. I don't know what exactly it would be, but maybe it's like a more Pan-Africanist orientation, or it's just like resource management, or just the ability to invest in the right things. Yeah, it would be leadership. I think that would probably be the quickest fix. And then from there, you can ask yourself, all right, like, let's invest in this infrastructure. Let's do that. Yeah. So.
Great. Thank you. So it's the end of the interview. Okay. Thank you again for your time. I appreciate you. I wish we had more time, but we are actually running out of time. Yeah. So we have
thanks,
to go.
Gigi. This was really fun. So I appreciate speaking with you about it as well. The questions were really good. So thanks.
Yeah. And as I always say, you are forever welcome to the YouTube channel. Whenever you want to come, just tell me, okay?
I shall. All right, will do.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks. Bye, Gigi.